We had created our infrastructure for dispersion variant and dispersion type. It's time to start writing our infrastructure for different storages so that later down the road we can utilize them. Hello everyone, this is Ali Reza. Welcome to the Mentor Code Lab. The first class that we want to write is the dispersion storage itself. Now keep in mind, this is not a real storage that contains something. If you look at Fabric API, for example, for fluids, you see that we have this fluid storage dot sided or dot item. This is exactly the same type of thing that we want to implement. And this is a public final class because we don't want to extend any class from this, and yet it should be accessible and usable. So it can't be abstract. We say public static final. Now, what we want is this sided call. In other words, we want to make sure that we can have sided dispersion inventories. To do that, we need a block API lookup of type storage of type dispersion variant. This makes the thing sided. However, if you look at block API lookup, it needs two generics. For time being, we defined A as a storage of our dispersion variant. So here we put a comma, and now we define C as being nullable from J specify, and that's the direction. Because let's face it, we want the direction to be the thing that we want for looking for the sided inventories. We say it's equal to block API lookup dot get. Now you see that we need an identifier, API class, and then context class. For the identifier, we can use base helper dot ID. For the ID, we have dispersion API dot ID. After the identifier, we want the namespace. The namespace will be sided underline dispersion underline storage. That's the identifier. Then we want the class for the storage. It's simply storage.class. And the last one is the C type, so it's direction.class. Believe it or not, we have our sided inventories being implemented and usable right now. The next one is the call for the item. Now this one is responsible of returning any item that has any storage of a variant type. By the way, I noticed that I have a problem here because it is waiting for a storage of dispersion variant and I gave it a storage. Let's see what's the problem here. Here I should use as a class, as a method call, and that fixes the problem there. Basically, when I'm saying storage.class, I'm tightly bind the type to the storage interface itself. But when I'm saying as class, I mean that, hey, any class that is implementing that interface, get its type and return it back. As I was saying, this item one is responsible of returning any item that has the storage that we want inside of it. In this scenario, any item that carries a dispersion storage inside of itself. Maybe, I don't know, a capsule, for example. We would say public static final. And this time we want item API lookup. Basically, it's similar concept. Here we want a storage of the dispersion variant. That's the storage that we want. However, this time we are not looking into any direction because we are not looking into any sided inventory. We just want a container that has the inventory. So we say container item context. Item equals to, this time we say item API lookup dot get. The same thing, the identifier. However, the identifier this time needs a different key, and that is item dispersion storage. After the item, again, we say storage dot as class. And finally, this time we want the container context, so container item context dot class. And that's our item. After this, we are free to add anything that we want. I want to be able to say dispersion storage.empty and get an empty storage back. So we will say public static final. That is a supplier of a type storage of dispersion variant. Basically, we are returning a supplier that supplies a storage of dispersion, and we call it empty equals to, as we said, we want a supplier. This is the supplier. Now all we want is objects.require non-null. What we want here is empty dispersion storage and then the instance of it. Right now, the instance is not implemented because the empty dispersion storage is actually an empty class and nothing inside of it. I just wrote the class names and generated the class names so that I can produce forward and go forward without any hiccups and with as little error as possible, like this instance. So let's go with the next one, public static event. The event we want is combined item API provider, and we call it combined item API provider event. If I want to, I will remove the event name and item. Inside here, we want to return a combined provided IMPL. I will add my own provider IMPL dot get or create item event for the item. For the event, we want to import the class, and if it's asking anything, we want this top one, Fabric API event. And as I said, this is something that we want to implement ourselves. And I have a typo there because it needs a D, and I'm not gonna import anyone that was before there. And this is an S needed. Okay, now we are correct on the name. Then we want a public static final. Again, another event. This time it's combined item API provider. And did I just, yeah, I'm not gonna use the gas storage, for God's sake. This is what I want. That's the same name. And this time we want general combined provider equals to combined providers IMPL dot create event. Again, I don't want the gas one. And all I'm sending in is a flag. Then we want the constructor that is private, dispersion storage, and it's empty. We want the static block. Here we say dispersion storage dot item dot register fallback stack. As you see, it says item stack, combiner, item context. I want to make it stack and context. Goes into the general one that we provided right now on top, dot invoker dot find the context. What we are doing here, we are saying that, hey, inside our combined item API provider, look and find any item that is matching this context that we want. And yes, the stack is not being used. So if you want to, you can send an anonymous variable here. However, I prefer to keep it as a stack just in case. Finally, we can use this combined item API provider and fix our problem. However, this is an internal interface, so a function interface that is saying public interface that, and this one is just a storage of dispersion variant, a method called find, and then container item context. That fixes the problem here. All we need is this class as the implementation of this interface. And again, that's an internal class, so public static class that. And you see that now we have these few errors. The first one is to fix the event system, public static event of combined provider create event with a boolean that is called invoke fallback. And as you see, it fixes this problem on top. Here we return event factory from NetFabric API event that create array baked for combined provider dot class. And then we want listeners as lambda go into. Now here we want a context lambda. So we are using lambda inside another lambda. Basically here we are defining two anonymous methods, one inside another. And here we want a list of storage of dispersion variant. We call it the storages equals to new array list. Then we want a combined event provider. We call it listener inside our listeners. And here we want to take the storage of dispersion variant. We call it found equals to the listener.find. the context. Then we want to check if the found does not equal to null. So basically we found the context that we want. We add it to the storages. So storages.add found. We are not returning here because we may have more than one storage there. After this block, we want to check if not storages dot is empty, meaning that we found something. And invoker fallback means that we want to invoke something. Then here we say storage of type dispersion variant fallback found equals to dispersion storage dot general combine provider dot invoker dot find context. So now we are finding the context on the storage, and if fallback found does not equal to null, so we found any fallback, we want to add it on the storages again. At the end, either we had the fallback or we didn't had the fallback. We looked into every storage that we can. If we had any storage matching the context, being fallback or not fallback, based on our flag, we got our storages. Now we want to return storages that is empty. If that's the case, we just return null. We don't have anything. Otherwise, we return a new combined storage, not a slotted, just a storage, because we don't have any slots of storages. So we combine every storage into each other and we return a combined storage. And that's our create event. Now, something that may make you a little bit confused is that the combined providers IMPL is an internal class. This internal class will have its own internal class. So this is a private static class that is private to the combined provider IMPL, and we call it provider, implements the item API lookup dot item API provider of type storage of dispersion variant. That's the first one. The second one is container item context. So this is the provider for the context. We say private final event of combined item API provider, we call it event, equals to create event. And for the fallback, we say true. So this will be a fallback type. And then we want to override a nullable method, and that is public storage that returns a dispersion variant. We call it find. We want to send in a not null item stack, and then container item context. Here we say if not context, dot get item variant dot matches. We want to match the context variant to the variant that we have on the item stack. If they are not matching, we want to say string error message equals to string.format query stack %s for formatting and container item context variant, again %s for another formatting, don't match. The first one is the item stack itself, and the second parameter that we were going to replace is context.get item variant. That's our error message. Now we say throw new illegal argument exception, and we send in the error message as the error there. At the end, when we hit here, we made sure that we found whatever we want, so we return the event.invoker.find, and that's that one. Finally, we say private static event of combined item API provider get or create item event item. By doing this, I should have fixed one more error on top. Somewhere here we had this create or something. If I find it here, create, get or create. And this is the last part that we want to implement. So we say item API lookup dot item provider of type. You should have the deal right now. Dispersion variant, not storage variant. And the second param is container item context existing provider equals to dispersion storage dot item dot get provider for the item. Then we check if existing provider equals to null, dispersion storage dot item dot register for items, new provider. Now, if you see, I have a problem here because the provider here is using lowercase p. It should be capital, and that should fix that one. And finally, the item. After that, we say existing provider equals to dispersion storage dot item dot get provider for the item. Then we check if the existing provider instance of the provider that we want, we call it registered provider. So if we found it, we simply return the register provider.event. Otherwise, if we hit here, we did try to register it, and then we did try to retrieve it, and it's not the same case, and something failed. So we say string error message equals to string.format. The message body is an incompatible provider was already registered for item %s provider %s. Means that we already had registered something with different provider. So when we want to get it, it's there, but it's not the same provider type that we are trying to retrieve. So the first one is the item, and the second one is existing provider that is already there with different type. At the end, we throw new illegal argument exception with the error message. And that is our dispersion storage class itself. The only problem we have is this other class that needs an instance as a singleton running there. So what did we do is actually we defined an event system that is being called, and we can utilize it so that we can retrieve our items. Cited, as you see, doesn't need any one of these mumbo jumbo that we have below, because if you notice, we are working with items all the time here. The cited inventories are simpler compared to items because we are just mapping a storage to a site. However, inside items, things are different because we need to store different information on an item to make it a storage of some type of something. Because of that, when we want to make sure that the item is the type that we want and has the storage and everything like that, or get the items that contain a storage from a list or any sort of functionality on items and item stacks, things are a bit complex. And all we had done here is actually to handle this complexity for the items. This is as far as we can go for time being on the dispersion storage. In the next video, we will come back and do the empty dispersion storage. This should be an easy one, and maybe we go forward with another one, but I need to implement it and see how long it takes. Have fun, everyone. Bye.